In this episode of GovLove, we will be discussing school violence. This topic may be distressing for members of our audience, so we caution you to listen with care. If you or someone you know needs assistance coping with trauma, please call or text 988 to reach the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline for support and resources. Take care, and thank you for listening. Coming to you from Kansas City, Missouri, this is GovLove, a podcast about local government. I'm Lauren Palmer, the Director of Local Government Services for the Mid-America Regional Council, and your host for this episode. GovLove is produced by ELGL, the Engaging Local Government Leaders Network. We engage the brightest minds in local government. You can support GovLove by becoming an ELGL member, so check out elgl.org to learn more and sign up for membership today. Today, I'm visiting with Vince DiPiazza, City Manager of Uvalde, Texas. Uvalde was thrust into the national spotlight on May 24, 2022, when a mass shooting at Robb Elementary School took the lives of 19 students and 2 teachers. Many others were physically injured, and the weight of this tragedy impacted the entire community. In the days and weeks that followed, we learned about deficiencies in the incident response that compounded the community confusion and grief about this incident. Yet another failure in our nation to protect children in their schools. Before listening to this episode, I encourage you to read the Critical Incident Review published earlier this year by the U.S. Department of Justice. It gives a great summary of the incident and many of the issues we will discuss today, and we will include a link in the show notes for this episode. To his credit, my guest has been very willing to discuss his experience to hopefully help our listeners improve their response to future crisis incidents. So Vince, I want to welcome you to GovLove. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, it's great to have you here today. Now, our listeners know that we generally always start our episodes with a lightning round of fun and lighthearted questions to help our guests warm up. But because we're covering a heavy topic today, I'm going to do something a little unorthodox and save our lightning round for the end of the interview. So Vince, I'm going to ask you to get us started by just telling us about your professional career and how you got into your current role in Uvalde.
Okay, well, I've been in the city management business for, I think about 38 years now. 28 of those years as city manager of 3 different communities in Texas, all under 20,000 people. So small towns, and like so many people, in the business, you sometimes chase the jobs. There's a bit of a mercenary element to us and jumping from community to community. But so this is the 3rd town that I've been city manager of, and I've been here now for 9.5 years. And it's been fairly good duty the last couple of years. Well, actually starting with COVID. Prior to that,
Sure.
It's been a tough 4 years, I think. But as has been the case for many people in the business, not so many people have had to deal with this kind of thing. But unfortunately, one of the things I learned in the aftermath is that we've got people in our business that have quite a bit of experience. I had outreach from all over the country from folks who said I was in Aurora, Colorado, or I was in Florida near Parkland, that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah, incredible.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your service. Like a 38-year career is amazing, especially 28 in city management. I'm a recovering city manager, so I know what that life is like. And 28 years is impressive.
It's just hard to believe is that many years have passed by. It really is.
Time flies when you're having fun, right?
And it has been mostly fun, I have to say. It's this is a business that is never boring. Yeah. It can be terrifying at times, but it's never boring.
It's never boring. It's always something new. One of my mentors told me city management is the toughest job you'll ever love. And that's has stuck with me. It's so true.
I think that's probably true.
Yeah. Well, with your incredible career, there's probably lots of interesting things we could talk about with you. But of course, today we want to hear your perspective on the shooting incident at Robb Elementary School. So just, Vince, to the extent that you're comfortable, maybe just take us through that day. When did you initially learn about the incident, and how did you respond in your role as city manager?
Okay, this happened over the noon hour, and at people who've been paying attention probably have heard the story about this. Was I think this was the last day of school. The kids had an awards ceremony that morning. It was a pretty relaxed day at school. I mean, it was going to be movies and snacks and that kind of stuff the rest of the afternoon. For those who stayed, parents who wanted to could take their children home after the award ceremony had taken place. I know that has weighed heavily on many of the parents who could not have known, what was about to happen. But I got the first word. I think it was actually I was in my office, and it was the fire marshal that happened to be there, and he said, where am I hearing reports of a shooting over at or near Robb Elementary, and so I got on the phone with my police chief immediately, who was actually out of town, out of state, and I'd assumed he was in contact with his people, and he was, and so I dealt with that through him. I decided fairly early on that my presence was not going to be required. This was a law enforcement matter, and although I've worked with law enforcement people for many years, I'm not a trained law enforcement person, so I thought I'd better leave it to the expertise of those folks. So I stayed at City Hall, and I was in touch with the chief, and I was in touch with actually the mayor went down there. In Texas, they have an emergency management role. He was there, and I talked to him a few times, and he was giving me reports from the scene too. So, yeah, that's one of those things I wonder about later. Later on, we might get to that about the things that well, in previous presentations, I sort of entitled that section "The Things That Keep Me Up at Night." Still, but so in my mind. Much has been made of the time that it took for law enforcement officers to get into the classroom and neutralize the shooter. But um, it for me, it passed in the blink of an eye. And then afterwards was the terrible, removing victims from the classroom, getting medical attention for those that were wounded, all that kind of stuff that was happening afterwards. That was the beginning of a terrible event for me. But the actual thing happened in my mind fairly quickly.
So let's talk about that. Several law enforcement and first responder agencies were involved in the incident, so not just the agencies with the City of Uvalde. Can you just briefly summarize some of the issues that resulted in a problematic response?
Sure, it's interesting because one of my first thoughts when I first got word that this was going on was that, well, we won't have any trouble mustering a law enforcement response because we had so many law enforcement people in the area. Obviously there's this much. We learned all about the school district police department. My people were there, the sheriff's department were there, but we also had lots of. We have a border patrol station in Uvalde, and about 150 agents work out of that. Now they're not all here; most of them leave the station and work in the places they have to work. But we have a large border patrol presence normally, and because of what had been going on the border in the last couple of years, we had a lot of state police, and in Texas, it's the Department of Public Safety, so we refer to them as DPS officers, and I'll probably use that term when we're talking. But plenty. So I thought plenty of DPS in the area, plenty of people. We'll have plenty of people on the scene. Well, we did have plenty of people on the scene, and I think, frankly, in retrospect, that looks like it was not a very good idea. It was not good that they flocked to the scene because I think it was a mass of confusion. There were more people on the scene than obviously were needed for the kind of response that was required in this particular situation. And I think it comes down to a sort of a who's in charge question. Command appears to us to have been confused. Now, most people think, and I think by policy, and also by his actions on the scene, the school district police chief was in charge of the event. But he walked that back a little bit afterwards, and I'm not sure what the latest did on that. I know our people thought they were deferring to him, but in all the confusion, you'd wish somebody had stepped up and challenged the decisions that were being made on the scene. But I think that was it. I think it was a failure of command, and and as resulting in part from the confusion.
And the DOJ report talks about kind of the determination of treating this more like a barricaded subject
Right,
incident than an
right.
active shooter incident. I mean, as you debrief that with your team, was that talked about on site? Was there a discussion around how are we responding to this?
I don't know that there was. I think that was one of the problems. I don't know that there was much of a discussion on site. Matter of fact, it seemed to me, and some of this is my subjective impression and review of the reports that have come out
Sure.
and videos we've seen. So I don't know. I don't know that my opinion is definitive, but there wasn't enough of that. It seems to me there should have been that. Now, I believe there was some communication going on. I believe the school chief, Chief Arredondo, was talking to someone else and consulting with someone else, but there wasn't any. There didn't seem to be any. Let's get together and make a plan. That didn't happen as far as I could
Yeah.
see. And
I
again, I
just,
think we've been consistent. I think in our assessment of that. These things are supposed to follow protocols that we're all trained in. I've got some rudimentary training in that sort of thing, and when it descended into chaos, apparently those protocols were not followed. And I think there's some argument that the outcome might not have been changed significantly,
yeah.
but I mean, there's still a good chance that a few of those folks that perished might have been saved if we'd gotten there earlier. That's tough to live with for all of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really big of you to admit that. And of course, our conversation today, and I know other presentations that you've done are really about we can't change what happened in
Right.
May 2022, but can we help educate others in local government to maybe do better the next time? And you always hope there isn't a next time, but
Right, I know, and that's
history
something
tells
maybe
us that's not
we should
realistic.
reserve that discussion for the latter part of the podcast. But I was going to say, for me, my job was mostly in the aftermath. So I mean, after this was over,
Right.
we had we had casualties to deal with. Of course, the emergency services people were on the scene and they were dealing with that, and people were being sent to the hospital, transported, and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then we were sort of the first task we were charged with, I think, was you know, establishing a location for rendezvous, because we lost people at the school, but 500 plus kids got out of there okay, and
Yeah.
we had to reunite them with their parents. And so we set up. City has a civic center in the middle of town. It's a fairly decent sized facility, and that was established as the point. So as kids were taken from the school, that's where they were taken. Um, Counseling was available there for anyone that needed it, and the kids were reunited with their parents, and that became kind of the gathering point for the rest of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's pivot and talk about the aftermath. The
Yep.
city of Uvalde, under your leadership, made a very intentional choice to be more open and out front with public information than some of the other agencies that were involved. So just tell us about that, and do you feel like that was the right decision?
Well, okay. Yeah, I think from the beginning, and there was a lot of cussing and discussing, you might say, that
Mhm.
was around that, and um, we all rely on our attorneys to help guide us through difficult situations with legal implications, and the inclination of the attorneys, particularly those who are looking out for your liability,
Yeah.
is basically to don't say anything, don't say any more than you have to. The council, and as you said, my leadership, but it was really me and the city council together, deciding that we wanted to be more upfront to the extent that we could. Now, I'm sure there are some people out there that don't think we were open enough, but that first summer after the incident sticks in my mind, because we had city council meetings that were attended by well, they were huge. This is something I've never experienced in my career. We had those council meetings at that civic center because that was the only place we'd accommodate the crowds and the media. You walk into a city council meeting and see 50 cameras and reporters to go with them and that kind of thing. It's an amazing sight in a small town like ours. Um, so I think I think ultimately we felt like it was the right thing to do, and so we listened to our attorneys. This is one of the things I tell my colleagues as far as advice for the future. Listen to your attorneys, but don't do everything they tell you. I mean, you have to be prudent, and we don't want to expose the city to any liability that's unnecessary. But this place is going to be around long after I'm gone, and so we need to make sure that we protect it. But we also, people that are involved in the situation, the victims and the victims' families deserve communication, and we tried to do that. And those were unpleasant meetings; they really were. But and even as they were happening, we would hear afterwards, we're sorry we're laying all this on you, but you're the only guys talking to us. And in the end, I think it may have bought us some goodwill, but the issues are so difficult to deal with. I think at least they feel like, for instance, like in organizing for the commemorations that we've had 2 years now, 2 anniversaries of this thing. They've come to us and we've assisted in making the facilities available and handling the stuff that goes with that. And we can have that discussion and have it civilly, even though there's still a lot of anger, I'm sure, toward the city and other agencies. But I think ultimately, there's what's practical and then there's what's right. And I think I don't know that you can go wrong by doing what's right, even if it's difficult. And to the credit of the council, they sat there and took it and tried to be as open as possible. I don't know. I don't know what to say as an ultimate conclusion for that. Ethics would tell you have to do the right thing, even if it's tough, and even if it doesn't have a payoff at the end of it, you still have to do the right thing. I'd like to think that's how we tried to manage that. Others might disagree. I don't know, but that's what was in my mind and the city council's mind. And it was tough. It was tough to keep everybody on track, and but
this is easy for me to say as somebody who didn't live through it, but objectively as a third party outsider, I think what you and your council did took real courage. And I think you listened to your community and responded as best you could when
we tried.
other public agencies did not take the same tact. And I'm sure they had their reasons for doing it. And maybe if I asked them these questions, they would say they felt like they did the right thing in the moment. But
I'm sure. And then, the other thing too is we are the locals. I mean, we're the people that are here. Some of us talking amongst ourselves, why are we getting all this, all this terrible, I'll call it vitriol, I suppose, for lack of a better term. But why are we getting that? And I used to joke with them. I said, because we're here and they can reach out and they can grab you by the throat, and you've made yourself available. I mean, so we're being the magnets for this. And I guess for me, having these discussions is difficult, but it's catharsis, and I think everybody needs that. And I had one of the people who was one of the angry speakers at the very beginning, meeting with her later, and she told me, she said, we said some things out of anger that we probably shouldn't have said. I said, I think we understand this. I think we understand this because the loss is awful. The situation they went through is something none of us wants to go through. So all that I think is understandable.
Yeah.
I hope we get to some point where we can talk about this calmly and rationally. I think we're getting there, but I think we still have a little bit of ways to go on that. And we have a community that needs to come back together, and I think there's a good chunk of people in Uvalde that would prefer that this all go away. I mean that we don't have to think about it and talk about it. And You travel around and you tell them where you're from, and they go, "Oh, Uvalde, oh, Uvalde." I mean, that's the kind of
Yeah.
reaction you get, and I think I think that's understandable as well. That feeling of can we get on with it? And so there's a tension, and there's a tension in the town that we're going to have to resolve one way or another. And I hope time will help, and continuing conversations will help. And I don't know.
Yep.
Uh,
That healing. Well, I want to talk more about your reflections over the last couple of years. I mean, you even said a lot is made of those 77 minutes, but for you, that went by in a flash.
right.
And in the weeks that followed, in the 2 years since, Uvalde has dealt with the lingering impacts of this tragedy. So, as you reflect back, I'd love anything that you can share about what you would tell your former self to be better prepared. I mean, let's start with immediately, kind of in those first 24 hours after the incident. What do you wish you could tell your former self in those moments?
That's an interesting question, because the scale of the post incident fallout was massive.
Yeah.
Vastly beyond anything we'd ever experienced before. Like most city managers, I've been through a few emergency situations, a lot of them weather related. Fires and storms. I worked in the panhandle of Texas before I got down here, where in Tornado Alley and high wind area, those kinds of things. We dealt with those. I've been through a few utility issues where we had some failures of the water system, that kind of thing. And then a few, smaller scale law enforcement incidents. Somebody barricaded in your community with a gun, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing like the scale for this. And we are a town of 16,000, and we have resources appropriate for a town of 16,000. So I don't know that there was much that you could do in our situation. Bigger cities are going to have the resources, and they're going to be more prepared for the influx. People descended on us from all over. You had the media from all over the world. We had government agencies. We had visitors, do-gooders, emergency people who respond to these kind of things with all the kind of support that they can do. I mean, we were just overwhelmed, I think, really at the beginning, and tried to do the best we could. And I don't know, I don't really know how you prep for this. A lot of decisions on how to accommodate this stuff was made ad hoc, and the one thing that I wish I had at the beginning was somebody to kind of coordinate communications, because I don't think we did a very good job of that in the early part. So one of the things I've told colleagues when I've had the opportunity to do it is if you're in a small city and you don't have a PI, a public information person, get somebody on retainer that you can call when it hits the fan, so to speak, and keeping a giving out accurate information and getting it to the places it needs to be is important. And I don't think we did a very good job of that at the beginning. That would be, and communication in anything like this is important.
Yeah, so critical. That's great advice.
Yeah. So I'd say, like I said, put somebody on retainer if you have to. And a lot of us, it's not that we can't afford it, but there are other staff needs that seem to take precedence. Maybe that's the thing that has to happen, is maybe the people that, like me, in small cities need to reframe the question, and that instead of an sort of if we had the money, or as a luxury item. But in this day and age, I don't know if that's true anymore. Once upon a time, maybe it was, but media, the social media, all the kind of things that happen in the world now with communication, you're better off trying to get a handle on that from the get-go. And if you're prepped for that, that would be key.
Absolutely.
But handling all the people that came into town like they did, and I said do-gooders in kind of a flippant way. A lot of folks were here to help and to do what they could. I really think the country suffered along with us vicariously,
Yeah.
because it is such a tragic thing. I mean, tragedies happen, but a school shooting is about the worst that I can think of that could happen in a community. Really, these were kids.
Absolutely. The children. And it hits
Yeah,
close to home. It's
it
relatable.
does,
Everybody
and
can
so
think that could have been our family.
yeah, and in a town like ours, the tragedy reached pretty deep into the community. I've told people, so there's not a lot of degrees of separation between Uvaldians. So we see each other at the grocery store, we see each other in church, we see each other on the little league field. We police officers know the families of the victims. There were some relations there and friendships there. That kind of thing. It was folks in my organization and folks in the community. We had a lot of connections, and some of those suffered quite a bit. It sort of took the character of almost of a family fight, where we know you. How could you have not acted in the situation, or how could you have done this or that or the other? And betrayal by people close to you is almost, or I should say, the sense of betrayal
Yeah.
to people close to you, it hurts. It hurts a lot, and so we've had to get over that. And I'm the outsider. I've been here 9.5 years, but I have no prior connections to the community, so it's a little bit different for me. But my staff intimately connected. So yeah. So while all this is going on, and we were having to manage all this stuff and help direct it, we still had city work to do, the usual
Still
stuff.
running a
Garbage still had to be
city, of course.
collected. We still had to deal with building permits, all those things, water bills, all those things are happening at the same time, and it is to the great credit of my staff that they were able to handle all that stuff. So they were doing their normal jobs and then stepping out to take care of other things. For instance, City Hall became kind of a warehouse of goods that were flowing in. People want to help. People want to do stuff, and our initial emotional responses send things, clothing, child supplies, diapers, toys. We were inundated with toys. All this stuff was. I imagine the school district was feeling the same thing with that, but we had City Hall was stacked with stuff coming in because people didn't know exactly where to send it. And I had a small team and my City Hall staff that was organizing and sorting all this stuff and making regular deliveries to the families that it was intended for. That was difficult but necessary. And
So, what about later on? I mean, you're 2 years into this recovery and healing now. I mean, as you look back, what do you wish you could tell yourself a year ago?
well, 1 year there again, to outsiders that are looking for answers, looking for, I'm not sure what they're looking for, but it's been now a year and then 2 years, and we don't see the accountability that we expect.
Hmm.
Again, in my mind, it's only been 2 years. There's still a lot of moving parts to this, and uh, I don't know. I think we're all impatient in the world we live in, and I think a lot of this stuff is going to take some time to work out. Um, we've talked to our counterparts in Newtown, Connecticut, and in Parkland, Florida, and the stuff like memorials, those kinds of things have taken a long, long time to resolve. And I think in the case of Newtown, I think just recently, and in the case of Parkland, I understand they still haven't worked those things out, and so this is going to be with us for a while,
Yeah,
I think. and
that's really
and
interesting. I mean, that is an unfortunate peer group to be part of, but
yes, it
that is
is.
kind of reassuring that there is this network of communities that have been through this that are
Well, like
helping
I said at the
support and
beginning,
educate each
yeah,
other.
I was getting emails from city managers and assistant city managers all over the country, and a few of them were like that. I was here when this happened, and here's some things that you need to think about, and
Yeah, incredible.
those kind of things. It's I guess it's really unfortunate in a way that we're developing an expertise in our business in dealing with this. We've talked about, how there really isn't a playbook for this, but I think we're formulating one as we go, unfortunately.
Well, let's talk about that. I have a few questions for you about just advice for other communities to prepare. I mean, what would you tell other city managers? What questions should they be asking their police chiefs, their emergency managers, to make sure that their cities are prepared for a mass shooting response?
Well, okay, so I think there are a number of things that I think we ought to be we ought to be thinking about and trying to do something about. You know, you can't have been a police officer almost anywhere for a while without having gone through some kind of mass shooter exercise training, that kind of thing. And there's been some of that. Not all of our people were trained, but we had plenty that were. It's fairly common knowledge what the protocols are. All that stuff focuses on the incident itself, though. Um, there's a lot, at least, and probably more in city management that we had to deal with afterwards. So there's no training that I'm aware of. Any systematic or organized training on, or regular training on how to respond to something after the fact. The other thing is, I think probably, and this is I'm assuming this has happened in other places, is that the fact that we had so many agencies respond, both in the incident itself and then afterwards in the aftermath. It's a little late to be developing relationships with the people in positions of responsibility in those agencies after the fact. I mean, we did what we had to do, but um, I think you have to. I think we have to figure out a way. When times are good, nobody's thinking about this stuff, and then it's a to me, it's almost it's sort of an interaction rapport. I think the same thing goes for the law enforcement response itself. Most of the people that were there, or a good chunk of them, knew each other and had worked together before, but I don't know that the rapport. I'll say command rapport. I don't know that it was where it needed to be. So those things obviously need some attention. Those Developing those relationships, maintaining those relationships, knowing the people who are the point people for their agencies in an emergency situation, and discussing how those kind of things work out, practically speaking. That's kind of vague. But that's what I would say. I already mentioned the public communications.
Yeah, this is
Um,
actually really encouraging for me. I work for a regional council and we do training and cross jurisdictional training and exercises and talk so much about how important it is
yeah,
to do
and
those trainings and build those relationships in blue skies
right,
times.
yeah,
So this
exactly,
is
and
really affirming for me. Like,
right,
okay.
we operate in a federal system, and federalism is difficult. Fragmented authority makes coordination difficult, even in the best of times, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
So, I think one of the advice is don't neglect the relationships with the key people in those other entities, and it has to be regular interaction, I think. What else can I say? It's worth talking a little bit about all the help that descends on you
Yeah.
after a situation like this. Managing the help became a thing, and lots of people, lots of organizations have the best of intentions, but for one, we had to kind of ration our time
Of course.
because so
Yeah.
much was going on, and in the middle of it, you're getting demands from people. I want to have an event in your community. I want to have an event, and I want the families to be involved. I mean, we were getting all kinds of requests like that, and I'm sure the families were pulled in a number of different directions. People who were contacting them directly. At some point, they had to kind of organize and get their own point person that they could refer those kind of requests to. And there again, so money came flowing in almost immediately. We made a decision early on that we were gonna take it. And I told my finance director, just park it somewhere, get donor intent to the extent that we can, so we can pigeonhole the money the way it's supposed to be. Eventually, the National Compassion Fund, which is a national organization that deals with this sort of stuff, came in here and helped us manage that, and we ended up turning over a lot of those donations to them. That that kind of angered my staff because they were having direct interactions and they were concerned about the intent. And I think that was probably one of the problems that happened. Lots of people wanted their early donations to go directly to meet the immediate needs of the families. And once we gave up some of the control of that money, it wasn't happening like that. It was being set aside, and that became a more problematic thing. Other organizations stepped up and did some of that, and we ended up doing kind of a workaround with a local nonprofit to take those donations, so it wasn't in our hands to mess with. But the other part of it is, people coming in, we want to have a fundraiser, we want to have an event for the children, all that kind of stuff. I said, oh, that's great. Okay, well, we need a facility, we need security, we need logistical support, and by the way, we don't want to have to pay for any of this because it's a charitable thing, and it just, I hated to turn that kind of stuff down or say you're on your own, but a lot of times we had to do that, and I know we probably came off as being ungrateful, but there again, we had to ration time and resources, and a lot of that was more a burden than an assistance. And there were plenty of groups that came in, did their thing, needed minimal stuff from us, and they weren't there for photo ops. They were just they were just doing it. That's the other thing too, is that people want to attach themselves to you in an emergency and say, I was here in Uvalde, and for whatever outside purposes. I'm sounding judgmental and sort of negative about it, but this is the reality, and I think the people in any town can see that when it's happening. And there are folks that have been with us from the beginning that have stayed here. We've had some counseling services that are here and have attempted to establish long-term relationships. We have another charity that has built new playgrounds for the kids, and they've done it with a minimum of fanfare outside of our town, because they've been collaborative projects with the kids getting to help design things and all that stuff. They've been great.
That's cool.
And there have been several like that. So I don't want to paint an overly negative picture of this, but I think you can expect, maybe I was naive because I'd never been in a situation like that. I guess when you reflect on it, you can see that that's probably a likely thing to happen when you have an event like this.
Yeah, a lot has to be managed.
Let's see. So the other thing I've told colleagues too is try not to make significant long-term decisions early in the emotion of the immediate aftermath. I think there were some things that we made some hasty, ill-advised decisions about that we regretted, and would have done better to say, thank you. We'll let us think about this and let things settle down before we deal with that.
Is there an example you can share?
An example would be a cemetery. We operate the cemetery here, and that's where most of the victims of the tragedy were interred. And there were special considerations that folks wanted. Well, I mean, there are a lot of people that are out there and already, and that's the cemetery for the community. Doing special things opens up a whole can of worms on other stuff. The memorials too, where they're going to be, and the impromptu stuff. We made I think a really bad decision early on to try to clean up some of that stuff, and it was way too soon.
Oh.
And as a matter of fact, I think I even got one of the emails from a colleague in another place. It said, "Be careful with that." And we took some citizen comment and ran with it when we shouldn't have. And so that sort of leads to the next thing I want to mention. Symbols and symbolic actions really do matter, and they're important to people. They're important to people that were directly involved in this, and they're important to the community as a whole. I tend to be kind of dismissive of that because I think symbols are not necessarily substance, but they do mean a lot to people. I've adjusted my thinking in that. Be careful, if you're out there and you have to tread these terrible waters, about the symbols. Not only do you have to do the right thing, but you have to look like you're doing the right thing. You have to have the proper attitude and demeanor when you're doing the right thing. You have to give the same. You have to give attention to things that you might not think are essential to the response of the moment. I mean, to me, they're almost distractions. But it's all about how people react to that, and what can I say? It is important, and don't dismiss that kind of thing, because that's part, over the long haul. That's part of the cohesion of the community. That's part of the healing that occurs, and you can send the wrong messages that you have to you have to walk back. I'm speaking a lot in abstracts, I know, but
No,
I
it's
think
really hitting home with me because
I
I
think it's
I think a
just
lot of managers are very tactical,
that's
right? They
exactly
gotta
right.
like get
Yeah,
the work done,
get the
and
work done. I don't have time for this touchy feely stuff right now.
yeah,
And I
oh
and
yeah,
I, I
that
use the
resonates.
term, and I know it sounds dismissive, but I don't mean it that way. It's just it's that kind of thing. And almost, I guess that's also with the way a lot of us feel about, or have felt in the past, about our own and our people's mental health. Touchy feely stuff.
Mhm.
That's another subject too that we probably ought to talk about.
Yep,
And then the other thing, I already talked about the lawyers. Listen to your lawyers, but don't necessarily let them dictate all your actions, especially when it comes to communicating with the public. Um, do what you can. Stretch that envelope as much as you can, obviously without putting your town at risk. But um, I think keep that
um,
keep that in your mind.
I'm thinking of my colleague Dan Bolin, who's one of our GovLove hosts, and he's a municipal attorney. So we'll just ask him to turn the volume down during this part of the podcast. Like,
Well, it's interestingly enough, our attorneys, the attorneys that work for the city, we have a city attorney and assistant city attorney, and they were pretty much on board with a lot of that stuff. So we had them to help argue our side, and I think they were part of what kept us from going too far. And again, like I said earlier, this town's going to be here for a while, and I don't want to be the guy that killed it by doing something unwise that resulted in a bunch of
yeah,
liability that we would not have faced otherwise. I personally really don't see how that can happen. I've sort of taken the position that factual information that we're in possession of cannot hurt us any more than it would, because it would come out at some point. And so disclosing it early, when you know it, disclosing it, assuming you've got a good handle on it, and that these really are facts. I don't see. We'll let the attorney make the argument that it should be
that's right.
otherwise, but um, I just don't think. It seems like you do it sometimes just to do it. I may be expressing some frustration more than I should, but well, we don't have to disclose this, so we're not going to disclose this. Well, just because you don't have to doesn't mean you shouldn't.
Yeah,
And that's another thing too, that most of the small communities are not set up for. The inundation of public information requests that we got, they came in by the hundreds. A lot of it was repetitive stuff. A lot of it was stuff that a request for records that we didn't have. A lot of it was submitting questions, and you go, well, they're just asking questions, you know how to answer those. But I think at some point, we kind of have to group those, and we had to try to address them. But we did get help. We did get help from the legal folks that were appointed by the liability insurance carrier to manage those. But I had a lot of I frankly had a lot of arguments over that too. Let it go.
yeah.
Release it. What harm can it cause? Maybe my instincts were
Converge.
wrong on that. I don't know. But I think in the end, this is the tension between those of us who have to live and work here and the people who came in from the outside to help us.
Yeah,
You live in the community, like I said. You see these people all the time, everybody, and we need to be as transparent. I hate the word, but we need to be as transparent as possible. We need to be as open and upfront and truthful as we can be.
yeah.
I think
I,
ultimately the truth can't really hurt you.
I really appreciate that perspective. I think that makes a lot of sense. Like, you know your
It's
community.
Yeah, and
Yes.
you do, and you know your community. That's key too. You know your community, and better than the outside attorneys, better the outside consultants, better than all the people that are coming in here to give you advice.
Right. Well, I've got a question for you that's, I guess, a little more global than just the incident that you lived through. The DOJ report really focuses on things that could have been done differently in this incident response. Is there more that cities can do to prevent mass shootings to begin with?
It's interesting that you use the word prevent. So, law enforcement response to me is still an after the fact thing, as is the I'll call it the fortressing of schools. Um, that's assuming that we can't do anything to keep from making shooters
Yeah.
potentially. And those are all things that apparently we have to do to some extent. I guess each community has to make those decisions. I was traveling recently and went to a place where schools were not fenced off and they were still open. I'm going, in this day and age, that's still a thing in some places.
Yeah.
And I mean,
Hard to
it's the
believe.
local folks that make those decisions. I don't know that I would, I think I would think about that, and maybe they have other things that that prevent entry by a threatening actor uh, that were not apparent to me just in viewing from the outside. But there are places, there are communities, and I think more and more as time goes by that are working on an area that we could call behavioral threat assessment.
Mhm.
And the idea being you try to identify, and I'll have to say, the young people, usually the young men in your community that are on a bad path, and do intervene, and the folks that are doing this are it's generally interdisciplinary teams. So you've got educators, you've got social workers, you've got mental health professionals, and law enforcement as a team. And these folks are identified, sometimes it's outreach from parents, sometimes it's outreach from the school. The school's got to be on the front line of this because they can, sometimes they're the first ones to see the kind of behavior that might end up being problematic. Um,
Yeah. I
and
think
and
go ahead.
and so I mean it's being done in other places. I think there's obviously a lot more attention to it in Texas now than there had been in the past. Um, the FBI is sort of on the forefront of developing these sort of techniques to deal with this, and it's very much kind of a case management system. And sometimes you're working with the young person for several years until you get them to a space or a place where they don't seem like they're the same kind of threat. And I'd like to recommend a book that to my colleagues,
Please.
if they could. It's called Trigger
Please.
Points, written by Mark Fullman. He's a journalist, and the book is half a study of the shooters themselves and their motivations, and I think a bit of a dispelling of the myth that um, that for an incident to happen like this, the person that does it, it's they snap for some reason and then they go off and do something that none of us could see coming, because that's what you always hear afterwards. We didn't know. We never thought this would happen. But the
Mhm.
fact of the matter is, in most of these cases, they leave plenty of clues behind, and that they are on a bad path. And I've heard from people that we've had these discussions with. Well, not all these kids are going to, or young people, kids. I say that I'm focused on that, the younger
Mhm.
cohort, I guess. Not all of them are going to shoot up a school or a Walmart or something like that, but most of them are leading problematic lives that are going to impact them negatively over the long haul in other ways. We know the correlates. We already know
Yeah.
this for
Yeah.
crime and it's education, lack of it's a lack of opportunity. It's economic opportunity. It's poverty. It's problematic home life. Not having parents or not having strong adults to guide them. It's all those things and that's probably, that underlies a lot of problematic behavior in our society, and shootings no less. But there seems to be even a kind of a darker area that involves this kind of activity. And the folks that are working in the field, there's a academic field in behavioral threat assessment, and you learn about that kind of stuff in this book, and the people that are working on trying to pull these pieces and put them together. Um, Tough to do in a free society. You can't put people in jail before they commit the crime, but we can get them help. And I think, wouldn't it be nice if, excuse me,
Okay.
wouldn't it be nice if we spent some of our time and effort on the front end instead of the back end, instead of waiting till the thing happens and assuming it's going to continue to happen.
Absolutely.
We've had
I
enough of these that you'd think that we would have developed some kind of national resolve. And
Yeah.
maybe I'm a late convert, like converts. You come into it after having the great revelation, and so I've had mine, and I've attempted to talk to colleagues about this, but and we'll continue to do so. And we've begun and are working at that sort of thing at the local level here. And I feel like, in particular in small towns, I mean, if you can't do it in a place like Uvalde, I don't know where you could, but where we're a little bit more connected. We're barely a neighborhood. The biggest city in our region or in our vicinity is San Antonio, a town of more than 2 million people, and we're barely a neighborhood in San Antonio. So we ought to be able to take care of the young people in our town that are having issues that might put them in. There again, they're not all going to be shooters, but they may be involved in substance abuse. They may be involved in other problematic behaviors. If you can nudge them off that path early, I think there's some evidence to show that this can work. Maybe not in all cases, but don't we have to try? I think we have to try.
I have to try.
Yeah.
I appreciate your vulnerability. You speak with real credibility on this topic, and I'm glad you said that, because that's really a message that I wanted our GovLove listeners to hear.
Right.
Like, how many times in the history of federalism have we learned and proven that often the best solutions are coming from the bottom through
Well,
local
I think so.
governments?
I think so. And yeah, you said it.
Yeah. Like, if we're waiting for the federal government to solve these issues, we could be waiting a long time. So I
Yeah.
hope this encourages some city leaders to think about more that we can do at the local level to help address violence. It's a big undertaking.
This particular book and the author that I recommended, he's done quite a bit of work in the area of mass shooting. It's pretty extensive output, lots of articles and that kind of thing. So if people look, his name is Mark Fullman. I think he writes primarily for Mother Jones, which is an interesting thing in itself. It sounds like people are going to react as some liberal rag, but this is serious journalistic work. I actually had a conversation with him and joked about how, I haven't read Mother Jones since I was in college. He said, "I'm going to tell people here that. That's funny."
Put it on my reading list.
But
Thanks for the recommendation.
if you look him up, and he's got a lot of published work that addresses this issue, and I think he's a go-to guy when it comes to learning about in-depth learning about what's happened in some of these incidents.
Yeah.
Do we have time? I don't know. You have other things to talk about, maybe, but I'd like to talk a little bit about mental health before we before we get
Yeah,
to that.
we do
So
have
I don't know
time.
if that's the next subject.
That's my next question.
Okay.
How have you addressed trauma recovery for yourself and your employees in the wake of this tragedy?
Okay. You're like most places, we have medical insurance that has a benefit for mental health services. We also have EAP, employee assistance programs, like most organizations do. That part of it, having the services available during normal times is fairly easy to do, I would say. but at some point, and then, we made it clear that we were willing to go the extra mile, make sure employees had time off if they needed to take advantage of these services. But when several months into this, when I inquired of my human resources manager, what the utilization looked like, she said it was pretty low. Outside of the police department, where the police chief made counseling mandatory, we could have a little argument. I had this discussion with colleagues at the state conference the other day about mandatory versus voluntary counseling. Counselors will give you different answers too. Utilization was low, so I think we were trying to figure out workarounds, and one of the first things that we came up with was, well, we're not going to require counseling, but we're going to require people to take training on how to deal with or how to recognize mental health issues among your coworkers.
Yeah.
Help training people to help other people get help if necessary. And then the other thing, obviously, is we talk about this, and we had several sessions that way, and had most employees there. It was an opportunity to discuss it in the open and to talk about these kind of needs in the open. And you hear a lot of this talk about around mental health and normalizing the conversation. I've been pretty upfront about my own struggles with my staff and with colleagues. And I think that's part of the thing. For one, it's difficult to hide at times, as you can see, and then and I think that's part of the normalizing it too. We're city managers. We're, like you said, practical. We want to get the work done. We're problem solvers by nature. Your emotional stuff takes backseat. But I think we all know that when you're not feeling good in your head, you're not at your peak performance either. And so I would say, get the help if get the help. It's there, and make sure it's easy for employees to access, and then try to think of ways to encourage utilization. Maybe my employees aren't as bad off as I am. I don't know. Maybe they're handling it better. I think it's individual by individual. So I don't know if low utilization is the go-to measure for the effectiveness. We are going to do an assessment. That's going to be the next thing. So 2 years into it, we're going to try to do an assessment of the mental health of our employees. And generally speaking, I've talked to some folks about that, and talked to some other organizations that have done it with their own people. And so maybe that'll give us a better gauge of where we are. We haven't done it yet, but that's on the horizon.
Yeah, that's really smart.
Self-care, I would say, so get the help. There are, as much as in my past, I've been inclined to sort of dismiss the self-help industry that's out there. And I would say there's probably a lot of junk out there, but there's some good stuff too. And there are a couple of authors and podcasts that have become regular to me that help support the counseling that I'm already getting. And then the last thing is lean on your colleagues. This is a pretty supportive business. I've been overwhelmed by the support I've received by people in the city management business, from not just in Texas, but all over the country. And I've had lots of conversations. I've initiated a lot of them. Got an email from somebody who said, if you ever want to talk, well, I'm taking you up on it. Do you have time to talk to me? Which is usually me venting and you listening. And so many of my colleagues have been willing to do that. Nobody's ever said, no, I don't want to hear that. So that's not happening. And that's not going to happen, I don't think, because we have. It's like you said, that the toughest job you'll ever love, or the most difficult job you ever love. I think we all have that kind of that shared sense of mission, you might say. And there's nothing, there's nobody that really understands the job like another city manager, another ACM. It's our colleagues understand it, and they've been through. Most of them have been through other stuff, maybe not the same as this, but the environment we work in can be volatile. It could be very stressful.
Hard.
For
sure. Thank you for saying that. I mean, we talk about this idea of networks and relationships so much on GovLove. I mean,
Yeah.
it's really the heart of ELGL, like having that network of
Right.
peers
Exactly.
behind you.
And
So thank you.
and when the chips are down, contact your colleagues. If you find somebody who's in difficulty in another community, it may be, they're under some pressure from the city council and their job's on the line, or they've been through another tragedy, a terrible weather event, whatever it might be. We all hesitate. We say, well, they're really busy right now, and they don't have time for this, which is true. They don't.
They
But
don't.
they will appreciate the outreach anyway. Call them anyway. You'll find the time to get together and chat, or at least the offer's out there. And a lot of times I took advantage of it later. I got the email, and a month or two later I would call somebody and ask if we could have a chat or that kind of thing. It does help. It's not just one thing. And then of course it does help when you have a very supportive spouse. I don't have kids at home. My kids all check in regularly, obviously, like they would anyway, probably. And I've been in the business for a long time, and my wife never went to council meetings, but she's been to just about every one of them the last 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
She's looking out for me, and my biggest problem is making her be quiet. She wants to get up, and when people are saying things to you that are not nice, like most of our spouses. We're used to it because we're in the business, but the spouses are not always, they're not as used to it, and they want to defend you and that kind of thing.
Yeah, so, I get that.
But it's been helpful, and I like to see her at council meetings. I said, don't say anything, but I want to have a clear view. I want to be able to see you from where I'm sitting. A viewing path. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay. Vince, thank you so much for your time and your candor. This is such an important conversation. As promised at the beginning of our interview, I want to end our interview on a little more uplifting note. So I'm going to ask you to indulge in an episode ending lightning round.
Okay.
Okay. So first lightning round question. Tell us something you love about the city of Uvalde that our listeners may not have learned through all the national media attention.
This is I've never been in a community where I didn't find something to love about it, and I've been in a few over the years, like a lot of us in this business. And Uvalde, good people, hardworking people, in an interesting part of the state. It's a lot of talk around the country about issues on the border. Uvalde's a bicultural community, heavily Hispanic. But there's always been an interaction, and there's always been. I'm not sure exactly how that bicultural flavor is interesting as heck, and being an outsider coming in here, and it's we're not Mexico, but we're not far from it, and there's a lot of that sensibility and that flavor to the area. And I know there have been struggles in the past with equal rights and political issues, and those are still an issue in some cases, but there's a familiarity and comfortability with the cultures, I think is positive. That's not a really lightning round answer. It's too complicated to put in one sentence.
That's okay. We got to learn something new. So next question, what is one thing you are working on at the city that has you energized and excited for the coming year?
It's bittersweet because the opportunities have come about because of the thing that happened here. But our ability to do some more things for activities for the children, where it starts at recreation and all the things that go along with it. There's some stuff brewing that I think is going to be pretty exciting that I'm not in a position to announce or let on yet, but it involves activities. And like I've said, we've been able to build new playgrounds. We're working on a few other projects for facilities like splash pads and that kind of thing. Things that we didn't have before, or things that could use some upgrading and modernizing are happening as a result of this. And there are still people that are out there and organizations out there that are willing to work with us and help us. get that kind of thing done. So that to me is kind of exciting. We
Triumph over
really need to pay
tragedy.
attention to that. There's a real focus, I think, on the city council and those of us working for the city that this is something we need to emphasize more than we've ever emphasized in the past.
That's great. All right, final lightning round question. You were recently named by your peers in the Texas City Management Association as City Administrator of the Year. Congratulations. What is one of your proudest accomplishments from your career?
From my career, this may date me a little bit, but if you remember, if anyone out there remembers the book In Search of Excellence, which came out in the early '80s, I think maybe.
Okay.
Made quite an impression on me at the time. It was a study of excellent companies and their practices. This kind of thing, we've seen a lot of this stuff, but that was one of the first ones that hit me. And one of the pieces of advice in the book was stick to the knitting, do the things that you do best. Well, for us, I think we do a good job on those basic things that we've done for a long time. Infrastructure. I think that maybe that's the main things. To sort of narrow the focus. There are some other functions I think we do a pretty good job of too. But I'm thinking, and those are the most. This one right now I think is challenging for most communities. How do we've got stuff in the ground that's been there for a while and needs to be redone. So I've had a number of infrastructure projects. I've built a new landfill. We've done sewer plant improvements. This is the kind of stuff that's not glamorous, right? But we spend a lot of our times worrying about garbage and poop, and
Yep.
and it's expensive.
Yep.
These are big
Critical
projects,
services.
right? Exactly, critical services. Water, providing water. I've done water
Absolutely.
projects, water wells, and storage and that kind of stuff. So I think across the communities I've worked for, I'm proud of those because those are the kind of things, basic services, development, planning, and those kinds of things. I don't know that I would pick any one project. I mean, I suppose I could be accused of what some people jokingly refer to as an edifice complex, but I'm not talking about Taj Mahal, city halls, that kind of thing. I'm talking about the basic things, fixing your streets,
Really matters.
putting the town on a path to get infrastructure projects done. I'm afraid that between COVID and the tragedy here that we've lost some momentum on that. That was one of the things I wanted to do, while I was here before I retired, and that kind of thing, is make sure we won't be able to fix all the problems, but to at least get the city on a path to do that. But yeah, I think there are lots of issues out there, lots of things that are concerns in the community and that kind of thing. But I think we do our best work when we stick to the basics, and that's what I've tried to focus on. That sounds kind of mundane. It's not, it's probably not anything that's going to get a monument to me on the town square, but
it's not
most
mundane.
of us are not going. Most of us are not going to get that anyway. I tell my staff that we're the operating system that the community runs on, and we do our best work when we're in the background and not obvious. So when somebody goes and has a good time at our park, they're not going to say, well, that the city manager gave us a really good park to work. No, they're going to remember the times they had with their family and the good times they had at the facility, and we're going to be in the background. I said our goal is to have an efficient operating system and to not have the blue screen of death appear very often, because when it crashes, people know, and we want to avoid that. So there again, when I got in the business as a young person, I thought we were going to do great things in the city, and I was going to get lots of pats on the back for all these good things. But you know what? Most people would prefer not to have to think about dealing with the city. They take advantage of the stuff that they put out. We were there to enable them to do the things they want to do, work, live, and raise their family. But we're not the focus.
That is very well said. We will wrap up on that note. Thank you again so much for joining the GovLove podcast. One final question for you, Vince. If you could be the GovLove DJ, what song would you pick as our exit music for this episode?
The last movement of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony.
We don't get classical music very often.
I grew up with parents who were classical musicians. My dad was a music professor and a
Oh,
concert pianist, and I'm an amateur. I play in a string quartet right now, although I've been in a couple of country bands. So, I mean, if you know the piece, we
oh yeah.
often colloquially referred to as "Ode to Joy." That's what
Yeah.
I would say. Yeah. Even though this was, in a lot of ways, it wasn't a joyful discussion, but
Yeah.
I think Beethoven's piece is a sort of optimistic,
Optimistic.
very
Absolutely.
optimistic piece, and it does talk about the brotherhood of man, to some degree. So, yeah, that would be my
I
choice.
I think it's perfect. Thanks. So that ends our episode for today. Thank you so much to our guest, Vince DiPiazza from Uvalde, Texas. Thank you for listening. You can reach us at elgl.org/GovLove or on social media at GovLove Podcast. This has been GovLove, a podcast about local government.